Hi friends. As you'll recall from our first week of remote learning, I assigned each one of you a significant detail from Nadine Gordimer's short story, The Train from Rhodesia. What I'd like to do now is to create a video companion to a PowerPoint slideshow which I've created and put up on our Gryphon page under the topics section, and the topic is Nadine Gordimer. So if you look there, you can find the PowerPoint slides that will be the basis of the video presentation I'm going to do now. So if you want to take a quick break from the video, find the Gryphon page, find the topics link, and then go to the Nadine Gordimer link. You should be able to open it and find the PowerPoint slideshow called Gordimer. And I'm going to talk about the various slides. Now, in a perfect universe, I would do that within the program, the PowerPoint program, because the program actually does allow that. But what I found is it creates a file that's too large for the Gryphon intranet. In other words, Gryphon can't accommodate a file of that size. So I'm going to create a YouTube video to go along with it. All right, I'm going to assume that you've uploaded the PowerPoint and that you can follow along. So I'm going to start the PowerPoint, and the first significant detail I'd like to speak about is the pointed chalet roof. As you can see from the slide, the pointed chalet roof is an architectural feature that you would see most often in a mountainous region in Europe, maybe the Alps. And the reason why is because it is designed, it is engineered to promote snow from sliding off of the roof. The roof is a very steep grade and a steep angle, and it tends to be very long, even down towards the ground in some cases. So as the snow mounts up, gravity and weight of the snow will push the snow down, and it will slide off of the roof. Well, that's great if you're in a mountainous area, but the question we have to ask ourselves is, why is this chalet roof on a station in sub-Saharan Africa? That doesn't seem appropriate to the needs of engineering buildings in Rhodesia, or what is now Zimbabwe, which leads to the next significant detail, which is the station master's uniform. The station master's uniform is described as being made of serge. Now, if you know what serge is, serge is a worsted wool, or a woven wool, and that wool uniform would be very warm, to say the least. If you've worn wool, you know this. So the question arises, why is the station master decked out in such an inappropriate outfit? He's got to be burning up there in sub-Saharan Africa. The answer, of course, is that the architectural feature, the uniform, are not chosen for the comfort or for the needs of the natives, but rather for the comfort and the needs of the Europeans who built and are riding on the train. So it is a very subtle way of demonstrating how the Europeans, how the authority have projected their own culture, have projected their own values onto the landscape here. Now, the landscape that is native, that is natural, is represented in the next few slides, and that is and those are the details, like the station master's barefoot children. So we sense that, first of all, that it's warm enough to be comfortable barefoot. The children are running around, but it also might say something about the relative wealth or poverty of the station master. Perhaps the station master is not as well off as a station master might be in Europe, for example. Then we have this term pickanin, which is an odious term. It is dropped in the text unceremoniously, without context, without comment. And so we have to wonder what it means and why it's there. Right? What it means, according to the slide, is that it is a term of derision, of condescension for authorities towards subjects, from Europeans to natives. So it is a term that is mildly, if not completely, racist. It's usually applied to or refers to the children of natives or people of color. And it's a term that you and I certainly would not want to use. It's a hurtful term. So we have to wonder, why does it appear in this text? Is our author a person who feels comfortable casually using these terms, which I think you just have to say are racist? So let's hold that question in abeyance for a while. We go on to the next slide. The skin of the dogs is stretched like parchment, which suggests that there is poverty, that these animals are starving. It tells us something about the native economy, and what it tells us isn't really good. The next slide is the significant detail: the train called out. You will recall from your other classwork that when you give or confer upon an inanimate object a human characteristic, it's called personification. So the train is personified here. It is given human characteristics. So we wonder, what are we supposed to learn about the train? What sorts of characteristics does it have? And what we'll learn is that it takes on the characteristics, unsurprisingly, of the Europeans who built and ride on the train. The next slide has a series of significant details. The 11th, the 12th, the 14th, the 20th, the 21st, the 22nd, according to my numbering. And they all refer to the native vendor, what I'll call the native vendor. The first term is the most suggestive term, and that is the old boy. I like to ask classes, how old do you think this figure is? And how old do you think this figure is? Oftentimes people will say 18, 19, 20, 21, thinking old and boy, well, that must mean teenager, splitting the difference. But what we have here is another subtle suggestion about race and authority. And this is a term which uses, or a phrase which uses a term that has unfortunate currency and history here in this country. So old means old. It does refer to age, but boy doesn't refer to age. Boy refers to authority or the lack thereof. In this country, we have a history of white men referring to black men as boys. That seems to be what's happening here. There are moments when this native vendor is referred to as a boy and his age is old. But then there are moments when the native vendor is referred to in more accurate terms, that he is a man, an old man, that he's a native, that he's an old native, that he's a vendor, that he's an old vendor. So what we learn is that there is a dichotomy between the uses of terminology. There is one set of terms which are condescending, diminishing of the native, that are clearly a response to the self-other dichotomy. But then there are other terms which are just more precise, more accurate, and those are the terms that we'll see emerge towards the end. Now, the next slide is a reference to poet and critic John Crowe Ransom's notion that there are two kinds of forms that we can work with. One are the economic forms, and the other is the sentimental forms. Now, the economic forms are the forms of value that are created by market forces. The other is a series of values that are created by sentiment, things that individuals uh, invest with value. For example, um, the first car that I bought, it was it was valuable to me because I drove my children around in it, and I couldn't imagine selling it for just a few dollars. But when I looked at the Blue Book value of the car online, it didn't take into consideration whether I had driven my daughters around. It only took into consideration the mileage, what shape it was in, its model year. Those are economic values. Then there are sentimental values. Now I bring this up because the key lever point here, or leverage, point of leverage here, is the lion. The question is going to be whether the lion is just a souvenir, a little trinket, a bauble, or whether it is a piece of real legitimate native art. And we have to wonder, what is it that makes art? What separates art from something like a bauble? And on top of that, we're going to have to think about the question of what makes a souvenir and what a souvenir is and how memory fits into that. So take a look at Ransom's forms there. All right, the next significant detail is her hand commanded. This should remind you of Daniel, taking control by the power of his own right hand. Her hand commands. This is something that she can do because she's an authority. Now, she's going to think better of this by the end of the story, but at this point, her hand still commands. Now we get to the question of the lion. She looks at the lion, which the native vendor is offering to her. Hopefully, she'll buy it, he thinks. And she notices a whole series of details, significant details, very significant details, because they suggest to her that this artist wasn't just making something to sell so that he could make another thing that he could sell, so he could make another thing. In other words, he didn't care about productivity. He slowed down his production because he delighted in the lion. He delighted in making the lion. And he took an artist's care in generating art. So what we have here is this art versus, or sentiment versus commerce, economic form conflict. Now what's interesting is, and troubling ultimately, is that after this beautiful lion is made, it still has to be sold. The native artisan feels like he must sell it. And so he has to go to a place that serves as a market for his art. And that place is the train platform. The train platform is, in every sense of the word, unfair. It is an unfair market. You get to see hegemony in action. The consumers are high up on the train. They lean out of windows. The vendors are low down on the platform. They are trying to get their goods up to the consumers. The consumers have an unfair advantage for two reasons. One, physically they're higher up, and also chronologically, or in terms of time, there is a set window for the market to be open. The clock is on, and these consumers are only going to be there for a few minutes, and then they're going to all be taken away artificially. And so they can use that leverage. Consequently, the vendors are jumping up and down. They're trying to get the wares, the goods, into the hands of these potential consumers, and they are described by the author as being like performing animals. So they are turned into the very thing that they are creating as souvenirs or pieces of art for these travelers, for these consumers. So we have this description of an arch of arms, but what I'm hoping that you'll see on the slide here from a front view is that you have what I'll call a tableau of hegemony. The the height of the consumer over the vendor. The this doesn't take into consideration the time variable, but you can see visually that the arch of arms is an unfair advantage and an unfair disadvantage for the natives. We have this description on the next slide of the railway vase with its pale dead flower. It's a very quick image that demonstrates the state of the soul of the train, which is to say the people on the train, which is to say the whole colonial enterprise. It is a dead pale flower. It was perhaps once something that was alive, but now it is certainly not. It is representative of the collective soul. Well, the young woman doesn't want the line, even though she delights in it as the artist has delighted in it. Too expensive, she says. But why? Why is it too expensive? Now, there is a key moment in the text. I'm going to read it to you. It goes like this. But the wooden buck, the hippos, the elephants, the baskets that already bulked out of their brown paper under the seats and on the luggage rack. Significant detail. Why is it too expensive? Because she's already bought bagfuls of other animal carvings on different railway stops. When you travel with your folks, or even by yourself, I imagine you have a budget for these things. And if you've bought too many things early, you can't spend later on, even if you see something wonderful. So it's the very volume of souvenirs that she's bought that drives her to this conclusion that this is too expensive. She can't afford it. She shouldn't do it. She's been traveling for a while. Now that gives us another important detail, which is she has been on a trip. She has been on a tour. She has been gathering souvenirs to try and help remind her of this trip. What is this trip? Why is it significant? These are important questions that we'll have to face a little bit later on. The next significant detail, the next slide, refers to her husband. So now we have a clearer sense of who we're talking about. This is a young woman. She has a husband, which means she's a young wife, though she never thinks of herself that way, right? So that's the nature of their relationship. It makes us wonder, is this trip a honeymoon? If this trip is a honeymoon, shouldn't they be just in the throes of love? It would make sense. It seems logical. So when they get into conflict, might the nature of this relationship, the potential for this to be a honeymoon trip, might this inform the nature of that conflict? How will it inform the nature of that conflict? Does it give us a hint as to the nature of the trip on the train? Is it a honeymoon? Can we guess whether they are coming from Rhodesia or returning back to Rhodesia? The suggestion is that if they are coming from Rhodesia, that they might share some of the values of Cecil Rhodes, whose Confession of Faith we've looked at and have found eminently upsetting. Then the author gives us a view into the mind of the young woman, whom the author describes as thinking, how will it look at home? So now this is an important part of any souvenir exchange. You give money to someone, you get a particular kind of bauble or something. Let me give you an example here. Here are some worry beads that I bought in Athens in 1980. Right? Here's a drop of Guinness in a paperweight from the Guinness storehouse. How will these look at home? Why do we bring these things home? My classroom is filled with souvenirs, flags, posters, various little things that I've bought in different places. This office is filled with things, little Trabant East German cars and sailboats from France and various mugs and whatnot. So why do I bring them home? What purpose do they serve? Well, the whole point, well, even if you can look back here just over my right hand, you can see that's the train schedule, uh, the arriving train schedule from Heidelberg's Hauptbahnhof, the train station, in 1980. So behind this camera, I have the departure schedule, the companion departure schedule. So I wanted these because I wanted to remember being in Heidelberg in 1980 when I was a student. So I have them framed now. But why? The reason why is because I want to think back. In German, they would call it Denkmal, or even a Nachdenken, to think back, to think again, to think this time. It takes you back. It's like a little time machine. That's why we buy souvenirs, to give us a kind of time machine experience. Well, the native is calling out his price. 1 in 6 boss. It says BAAS, but it's supposed to be like boss. Then the next slide shows you once again, in case you missed it, here is another use of that offensive word pickaninns. And again, we have to think, is this author someone that we really shouldn't be reading, because she is going to throw around these terms without thinking about the feelings of the readers. Well, the next slide refers to the blind end of the train. This is significant because it's another version of personification. The train is like the people on the train. Its soul is a dead pale flower, and the blind end of the train is the train that's moving forward. It's a case of literally the blind leading the blind, because the people on the train are blind, especially the young husband who doesn't get it, right? He might as well have written The White Man's Burden, because he decides that he is going to step in heroically and get this lion for his wife. He has seen that she likes the lion. He's also observed that she thinks it's too expensive, and so therefore he feels like he's going to intercede, and he is going to play the great white male savior. And so he uses the unfair advantage of height over the train, of collapsing window of time in the market, and he negotiates down the price, buys it in a way that forces the old vendor, the native vendor, to run after the train, to throw the lion up, and then the young man throws the money down in the dirt, and the native vendor has to pick it out of the dirt. So there's your lion. What is the young husband feeling? It would seem that he feels triumphant, that he has defeated the native vendor in some important game, the game of colonial enterprise. Well, of course he's going to win, right? He is essentially flexing for his wife. Masculinity, economic prowess, the imperial authority are all bound up into one ugly package. Well, the wife understands this, and she calls her husband out. Why didn't you take it decently, like politeness, like courtesy? Those are social constructions, and so is decency. It is a dynamic. Decency is, you could say, an arbitrary value, but it is a value that we construct together. He takes this for granted. He doesn't think of it as a shared system or a shared language. He can't take it decently because he doesn't understand what decency is. So he doesn't even comprehend what she's talking about here. She is defensive towards the work, and she uses it as a cudgel to beat her husband with. She describes it as the artist describes it as a beautiful piece of work. So now it's not a bauble. It is not a souvenir. It is an object of art. But why is it an object of art? It's an object of art because the artist spent too much time working on it. Too much time is determined by how much value you can get paid in return for the labor that you invest in the object. The problem with artists is that they want to make their object of art as perfect as they can, and then they'll try and get the money that they can for it. This is an incredibly unproductive way of going about making a living. It's a foolish way. There should never be an artist anywhere because they throw away their real value, which is imagination, which is their determination to render in three-dimensional real terms an idea, and they refuse to stop until the thing's perfect. Well, she sees that there. She now understands that the lion is art, and as such, she has to defend it against her husband, against commerce, against colonialism, against the history that is written by the winners. And they don't even think that they're winners, people like her husband. The truth lands on her like a 16-ton weight. She has what you and I would call an epiphany. And the next slide is a definition of an epiphany. It is, let's see, it's described as being what? A sudden moment of insight or understanding, right? So she has this sudden moment of insight. So let me read to you the moment of epiphany from the text. It's on the next slide. She sat down again in the corner and her face slumped against her hand, stared out the window. Everything was turning around inside of her. Now that's a description of a revolution. Things are turning around like a wheel revolves. There are a certain number of revolutions. Something is turning around inside of her. 1 and 6, 1 and 6, 1 and 6 for the wood and the carving and the sinews and the legs and the switch of the tail, the mouth open like that and the teeth, the black tongue like rolling like a wave, the mane around the neck. The mane is really important. Okay, significant details. It's the detail that the artist puts into the lion that makes it so valuable. To give 1 and 6 for that, well, she can't tolerate that. So let me read how she feels. We talked about worthiness as a dynamic. Now we're going to see shame as a dynamic. The heat of shame mounted through her legs and body and sounded in her ears like the sound of sand pouring. That is a terrific image. The sound of sand pouring, pouring, pouring. She sat there, sick, a weariness, a tastelessness. The discovery of a void made her hands slacken their grip, atrophy emptily, as if the hour was not worth their grasp. She was feeling like this again. All right, so this isn't the first time. Chances are she's feeling this again because this young man, this young husband, makes her feel that way. She thought it had something to do with singleness, with being alone, with belonging too much to oneself. What would Edward Said say? He would say, yes, it does. It does. It has too much to do with your self-other dichotomy. Well, she's flattened. She can't be the person she was before. She even realizes she can't be with this man anymore. She can't be a part of this imperial colonial situation anymore. We go to the next slide, the next detail. The train casts its station like a skin. This means change, transformation. It's a nice image. And the train looks like a snake. But you have to ask yourself, why also a snake? Garden of Eden, Satan, maybe that's pushing it too far. But it seems like it's there. So, if I were to ask you, is she really changed? Will she go home and be really different? Will she cast off this relationship? Will she cast off her imperialist behavior, her colonialist behavior? Will she be an advocate for native rights? There was no answer, the text says. Why not? Well, those are the significant details that take us up to the final 8, which I asked each of you to write about. But I would also ask you to consider the question of whether or not Nadine Gordimer is, in fact, on thin ice here. Here is what I want to suggest. If you think about point of view, this story is told from a kind of moderated point of view. It's kind of third person, but it's also kind of first person. So what we realize is that the narrator is at one moment giving a third person perspective, for example, on the vendor, and calls the vendor an old native, just accurately what the vendor is. But then at moments, the author will use terms like pickaninnies or old boy, and you realize that what the author is subtly doing is quickly shifting from a third person perspective to a first person perspective, the perspective of the young woman on the train. This is how she was brought up to think about natives. This is how she was brought up to regard her place in this colonial environment. She thinks this way. We don't have an obvious transition. Nadine Gordimer just swaps her third person perspective out for the young woman's first person perspective. We need to do the work in the same way that Chaucer wanted us to do the work of trying to figure out what was significant about the details for each one of the characters. So, I hope this is helpful to you. Send me some questions via email as they occur to you. So I wrap that up now, and if you haven't checked out the other videos on my channel, please do, especially the bubble wrap video, which I hope that you will watch and consider my congratulating and honoring you for hanging in there. All right, cheers. Thanks so much, guys.